Released in 1988, Big tells the story of 12-year-old Josh Baskin, who doesn't want to wait for all the joys that come from being a grown-up, and after being rejected for going on a carnival ride and feeling humiliated, he finds a mysterious fortune-telling arcade machine called Zoltar, where he makes a wish to be big, and lo and behold, the next day he wakes up as a 30-something-year-old Tom Hanks, where naturally his mum thinks he's an intruder and tries to kill him. Where Josh, with the body of a man but mind of a child, must head out into the city and fend for himself, as he ends up working for a toy company and starts making good money and sparks a romance with co-worker Susan, played by Elizabeth Perkins. But while enjoying all the luxuries of being an adult, Josh starts to miss the innocence of his childhood.
Well, gee whiz, when you say the plot out loud like I just did, it sounds kind of tragic. But Big is actually a very funny movie. In fact, I would probably say it's one of the greatest comedies of all time. So, with great comedies come 10 great things you didn't know about lists by me. Check it out! We shall.
Number 10. Steven Spielberg was going to direct. Steven Spielberg's sister, Anne Spielberg, wrote the script for Big, alongside Gary Ross, who would go on to write and direct the criminally underrated Pleasantville, along with The Hunger Games, and it was intended for Anne Spielberg's brother, the great Steven Spielberg, to direct, which would have been interesting to see. But round about that time of the early production of Big, Steven Spielberg was also working on the Peter Pan movie, Hook. But incidentally, he dropped out of both projects as his son, Max Spielberg, was born. Spielberg would go on to direct Hook several years later in 1991, and Max Spielberg would go on to direct Jaws 19. As for Big, well, after Spielberg left, Penny Marshall was offered to direct. Marshall had previously starred in the sitcom Laverne and Shirley, and 1 year before Big had directed Jumping Jack Flash, and going by Big, she has a great cinematic eye and natural knack for comedic timing. Number 9. Big actors considered. So the big question is, no pun intended, who could play the part of Josh Baskins, a 12-year-old stuck in a 30-year-old's body? It would have had to have been a charismatic actor with charm and youthful innocence and likability about them. Interestingly, when Steven Spielberg was at the helm of Big, his choice for the role was Harrison Ford, which I find bizarre. Look, I don't mean any disrespect to Ford, I love the guy. But when I think of him, I think of tough, swashbuckling, heroic roles such as Han Solo and Indiana Jones. I just can't see him as a playful 12-year-old, but who knows? Maybe he may have pulled it off and proved me wrong. When Spielberg left the project, the first choice for the role was Tom Hanks, but he initially turned down the part as he was starring in other movies at that time, such as Turner and Hooch, Punchline, Dragnet, and The Burbs. Yeah, the 80s was a big time for Hanks. John Travolta wanted the part, but the production didn't want him, as he was notorious for starring in box office duds at the time. Yep, Pulp Fiction hadn't been invented yet. Sean Penn was interested, but it was felt that he was too young. Gary Busey auditioned, but he was considered a little too childlike and crazy. Kevin Costner was offered, he said no. Warren Beatty was offered, he said no. Dennis Quaid was offered, and he said no. Probably because at that time he was stuck inside Martin Short.
It seems that Big's production just couldn't find the right actor to play adult Josh, until finally the part was cast. Yes, the role was finally given to Robert De Niro. Wait, what?
Number 8, and then there was Robert De Niro. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Robert De Niro was known for playing serious tough guy roles, where he could shift from playing psychopaths to police officers to gangsters. Heck, even in his comedy effort, The King of Comedy, he still played someone truly deranged. So De Niro decided it was time to broaden his acting talents and to appear in a more child-friendly family movie, where he accepted the role of adult Josh in Big. Oh, and he really got himself prepared for the role too, as he would frequently hang out with Jared Rushton, who played Josh's childhood buddy Billy, where the two would often shoot hoops and go skateboarding. My god, just imagine Robert De Niro on a skateboard. That's hilarious. So with De Niro seemingly committed and on board, what went wrong? Well, it was decided his $6 million fee for starring in the movie was too high. So the movie's production went from De Niro to Big No.
See that? You see what I did there? It's okay, moving along.
Number 7. Then Josh was nearly a woman. Robert De Niro's failed involvement with Big wasn't a complete failure after all, as having his name attached to the project managed to gain the production some momentum within Hollywood. So much so that when Tom Hanks was asked a second time if he would play the role, he accepted. To which he brings his likability, comedic timing, and childlike innocence to the part. Heck, Hanks is so likable, the movie's poster just literally consists of a photo of his head. However, actress Deborah Ringer was offered the role of the movie's love interest Susan Lawrence, but couldn't due to being pregnant at the time, so the part went to Elizabeth Perkins. However, Winger suggested that they change the gender of the main protagonist to make Josh a 12-year-old girl who becomes a 30-something-year-old woman. But director Penny Marshall rejected the idea, feeling that the character of Josh should remain male. Number 6. The truth about the foot piano scene. A standout in the movie is when the Josh character and Mr. McMillan, played by Robert Loggia, aka Frank from Scarface, perform on the walking piano. It's definitely a scene that everyone remembers and has become an iconic moment in cinema. The scene came about because director Penny Marshall saw a similar foot piano at FAO Schwartz Toy Store and wanted to incorporate it into the movie. However, she wanted it to be bigger in order to have 2 fully grown actors performing on it. So she contacted FAO Schwartz and asked if they could make a bigger version of their walking piano with the specified requirements, which they did. On the day of filming, both Tom Hanks and Robert Loggia had their stuntmen on standby, in case they couldn't get the keys right to the tune that they were performing to. So the 2 actors were determined to do it themselves, which they did. That was actually them making the music on the keynotes with their feet. And in addition to that, the foot piano is still in the store where Big was filmed. So because I'm talking about Big, I found my own foot piano. So let's unbox this and see what I can do when I get my hands, or rather my feet, on a foot piano.
Alright, so apologies that you won't be able to see my face while I'm doing this, but it is actually me, Minty, doing it. So let's give this walking piano a go, and let's see if I'm as good as Tom Hanks in Big. Let's do this. Okay, it doesn't sound very good, but give me some credit, this is my first go. Rocks! I like it! Back to the review!
Number 5. Big similarities to a real Transformers toy line. So when Josh becomes a grown-up, he ends up working for a toy company, where thanks to knowing what children like, on the account that, well, he's a child, he manages to climb up the ranks of the workplace, and in one scene proposes a new toy lineup that consists of robots that transform into prehistoric insect creatures. However, this idea actually really did happen. 3 years earlier, the Insecticons were introduced into the Transformers toy lineup, as well as the cartoon. This is unique for 2 reasons. 1. This was either an astonishing coincidence, or it was loosely based on the Transformers Insecticons, and 2. If it was based on the real Transformers toys, did they have to pay a fee for the similarities, or did they just not tell the Transformers company and thus they never found out about it and there was no lawsuits for the use of creative properties?
This is an enigma, wrapped up in a puzzle and stored in a shoe. I don't think I could ever solve this mystery, can you?
Number 4. Capturing the inner child/adult. The role of young Josh was played by David Moscow, who to be fair does a perfectly good job in the role. He's believable as a kid who wants to grow up, and he actually looks a lot like Tom Hanks. Now granted, Moscow had to dye his hair black and wear green eye contact lenses, but I can believe that these two are the same person. In order to feel what it's like to be a 12-year-old boy, a lot of the scenes with Josh as a grown-up were filmed with Moscow in the role of a 30-something-year-old Josh, to which Hanks would observe Moscow's mannerisms and then reenact them with him in the role in the reshoots for the scene.
So I guess that in a weird way there is another cut of Big, where he stays 12 years old after all. Yep, that version is called Small.
By the way, in case you don't feel old yet, this is what David Moscow looks like now. Number 3. Musical. Yes, believe it or not, but there was actually a musical based on Big, which came out in 1996, with music written by David Shire, who has composed music for many movies and TV shows, such as Saturday Night Fever, Return to Oz, and Short Circuit. After making its first leaps and bounds onto Broadway in 1996, the initial reviews were fairly mixed. I guess at the time people just didn't quite know what to make of a musical based on Big. But after its second release in 1998, it got much better reviews and would go on to win a Tony Award and a Theatre World Award. So if you have ever watched Big and thought that it was good but just needed more scenes of characters breaking out into song, then Big the Musical is the pinnacle of happiness that you've been looking for. In fact, even this very year of 2019, Big the Musical has been in production. Number 2, it came out during a string of age-changing movies. Yes, as weird as it sounds, Big came out during a bombardment of comedies involving characters doing age changes and becoming older or younger. These include De Grande, which is an Italian movie which some claim to be the inspiration of Big, as it deals with a boy who makes a wish to be big and lo and behold he becomes an instant adult, complete with the main character having to get a job and faking the kidnapping of his younger self. Yeah, there is actually a lot of similarities between De Grande and Big. Then there was 18 again, in which after a car accident, an 81-year-old played by George Burns switches bodies with his 18-year-old grandson, where wacky shenanigans ensue. But the two movies that Big is often associated with are Like Father Like Son and vice versa. Two movies involving sons having body swaps with their fathers. Apparently the production of Big were aware of these two other movies. Director Penny Marshall supposedly read the scripts to Like Father Like Son and vice versa and was confident that Big wasn't too similar to them. And when Hanks and Perkins found out about the production of the rival movies, they apparently had a freak out moment where they both felt that Big was going to be a flop and a straight-to-video release.
But thankfully, things didn't pan out that way.
Number 1. It wasn't a flop and it broke records. Despite Vice Versa making $13 million at the box office and Like Father Like Son making $34 million, Big still rose triumphant and was definitely the better movie in the genre, as it made a whopping $151 million at the box office on an $18 million budget. To which the movie got rave reviews, with Hanks' performance in particular receiving great praise, and the movie was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actor and Best Screenplay. And the movie frequently makes it to funniest movies of all time lists. But more importantly, the movie broke records, as it was the first movie to be directed by a female to make over $100 million at the box office. It may have been a rough start to make Big, what with Spielberg leaving, difficulties in casting a lead, and competition from similar movies, but despite all this, the movie proves that anything is possible if you dream big.
So that was my look into Big, a movie with a big heart, and a movie that was another step up the ladder in the ever-growing career of Tom Hanks. What I like most about this movie is that it teaches you to enjoy all stages of life, but to also let them progress naturally, which I find to be a positive message. Anyway, I'm Minty, and I got really ripped off on the whole Big thing, because despite the fact that I'm now an adult grown man, I'm still a short ass. See ya.